So, why have Russia invaded Ukraine? The first reason why Russia invaded Ukraine is because they saw NATO as a threat. Remember, this all started because Ukraine wanted to join NATO. And they saw NATO expanding out all across Europe. Of course, Russia knew that they probably wouldn't be able to get into NATO. They kept saying, you know, why are you pushing military operations onto our border? Why is NATO continually growing? It's very intimidating for Russia as a country. You know, Russia didn't want them to expand at all. They've warned NATO. They said, if you expand into Ukraine, there will be devastating consequences. Because of course, Russia saw Ukraine as their own land. You know, they saw Ukraine taking it off them back in the a couple of decades ago. You know, they see Ukraine as theirs. And this is why, if Ukraine were to join NATO, they would never be able to get that land back, would they? Putin didn't think the West understood all this. You know, there was negotiations going on for 6 months, and all he ever wanted was Ukraine not to join NATO. That's all he ever warned. He said the ball was in your court, it was in the West's court. You know, they've caused this, not him. Putin wanted peace. He tried to negotiate. You know, these were ongoing. He invaded because he felt like he had no choice. He felt like the security of Russia was under threat by NATO, not the other way round. He felt like if he hadn't have invaded, NATO becoming increasingly stronger and may plan an invasion in the future. You know, of course, as NATO and as part of the West, we understand that this is not the case at all. But Putin had to look on it differently. Putin actually put it very interestingly. What if I were to put military operations? What if I were to put things on your borders? Yeah, how would you feel if I started building up things on the Mexico-American border? You know, America would be very put off, and they see the same NATO doing to them. Them expanding into Ukraine. You know, they see them building their military operations. NATO getting bigger and bigger, and it's increasingly more worrying for Russia. But of course, on the other hand, Ukraine are their own country, aren't they? They should have the right to decide if they want to join NATO or not. You know, they are their own individual land. They don't belong to Russia. You know, they break away from that. So that's the battle that we see on our hands today. Now, unfortunately, Russia have invaded Ukraine after long negotiations, and Putin doesn't believe that the West is hearing him or believing him. What we need right now is a strong, powerful leader to say, look, Putin, if you step on any of the NATO countries, if you go past Ukraine, if you start invading elsewhere in Europe, you're going to be blown off the, yeah? You're going to be blown off, yeah? That's what's going to happen. If you touch any of our NATO countries, that's what's going to happen. We need to put in severe sanctions. Unfortunately, 80% of the Russian economy, 80% of the wealth of Russia is through oil. And we haven't put any sanctions on oil yet. We haven't done any of that. This is all playing into Putin's hands. You see, Putin can just sit back. These sanctions aren't going to threaten what? Banning Russia from the Eurovision Song Contest. He's not cared about that, is he? So I believe we need stronger sanctions. We need to remove Russia from SWIFT, such as, because this would stop international payments going into Russia. This would be a massive step forward in my eyes. We need to look at massive projections if they were to go further than Ukraine, you know. We should say, if you invade any of our NATO countries, we will remove you from SWIFT. We will ban you holding the Olympics for 100 years. We will ban flights for long term. You know, this will have a devastating impact for decades to come in your country if you dare step foot on our NATO countries. You know, we need to make that clear and obvious to Putin. We need a strong, powerful leader that will say you'll be blown up if you step inside our NATO country. We actually outclass them on everything military, other than nukes. You know, Putin sees NATO as a massive threat. You know, although he's seen as a madman from the West, he is still human. He's still got a country to run. He still has his own people. He still has emotions. He knows that if he were to mess with NATO, things could be very devastating. And we need to be brutal with this and make sure that he knows exactly what he's getting into if he steps over that border. We need to have a strong, powerful leader. Another thing is that, of course, all the Western countries, all of us keep saying we're going to net zero, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. Well, that would remove the wealth of Russia in the future, wouldn't it? If we didn't need oil, if we were just using electrical cars instead of petrol and diesel, you know, if we made that switch, then Russia's wealth would be dramatically reduced. So that is what I believe NATO should be doing. Stronger sanctions. We need a strong, powerful leader. We need to make clear and obvious rules that if Russia go further than Ukraine, if they go into NATO countries, there will be severe sanctions that will impact Russia for decades to come, even centuries. You know, we need to make sure that it does not go past Ukraine. And if it does, there's severe sanctions for that. You know, we don't want wishy-washy banning them from the Eurovision Song Contest, because at the end of the day, this isn't going to do anything. You know, we haven't even touched Russia's biggest financial assets, which is oil. We haven't put any complications on that at all. I also understand Ukraine. You know, they're their own country. Russia needs to understand this. They have their own land. They can decide whether they want to join NATO or not. You see, Putin, Ukraine, NATO isn't a threat. You know, we are not trying to build up our military to fight you. We are not trying to start any wars. We are not trying to do any of this at all. We just simply want peace. That is all we want. And it seems like we're sharing the same objectives here. We both want peace. You know, I understand that you see NATO as a threat, but we are not a threat. I understand that you see Ukraine as your land, but apparently it is definitely not. You know, this got taken away, and that was that. I understand that you wanted peace. I understand that. You know, we had 6 months of negotiations, and it didn't really get anywhere. You felt like you had to invade for the security of Russia. You felt like it was a defensive move rather than offensive move. I understand that you felt like you had no choice. And with all that being said, please do subscribe, leave a like, and I'll see you in the next one, people. Let's hope these things don't get out of hand.